Or we can open up whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Or we can open up whenever you're ready.
So good morning and welcome. So this is the second in our Waste Not Talking Trash series. And the focus is on plastics. So I would say, how much plastic did you use in the last 24 hours? I'm sure I've used a bunch. I mean, my toothbrush is made of plastic, and the toothpaste is in a plastic tube. But I'm kind of lazy, so I use plastic plates. I use paper plates, but they're coated in plastic, and that's why they don't drip through, so that if you have liquids on the plate, that they're coated with some kind of a plastic, so that's why the plastic doesn't go through. Of course, we put our garbage in plastic bags, and sometimes I use a plastic cup. I think I did use a plastic cup last night. And of course, if you use those, if you're into TV, any kind of a TV dinner or a dinner that you just heat up in your microwave, a lot of times those things are in plastic. So those plastic bags that say, they steam your vegetables. So the question is think about how much plastic you use and how much plastic is in your life. I mean, here on a computer that's made of mostly plastic, and my laptop is made mostly of plastic also. And how does, so plastics really pervade our life, and there doesn't seem to be any real lessening of them. And they've made life really easy, but what's the downside of plastics? So today we're going to talk all about plastics and why they're, I don't know if we're going to focus too much on why they're good, because I mean, we all kind of know why they make our life easier, but we're going to focus a little bit on why maybe we should try to lessen the plastics in our lives. We have a number of co-sponsors that we want to thank and welcome. We have Assembly members Alicia Hindman and Khalil Anderson as our co-sponsors. We also have Queensborough President Donovan Richards and Council Member Selvina Brooks Powers of the 31st Council District and QSWAB. So we want to thank all of those people for being our co-sponsors. And at this time, I will introduce Borough President Donovan Richards. I assume he is in the house, and he wanted to say a few words to you.
Is the borough president in the house at this point in time? I don't see him in the participant list, and so
I don't see him either.
yes.
But I've spoken with him this morning, and I'll send him a text. I know he has the link.
Right. So both the borough president and our city council member Brooks Powers will be joining us, and when they do, at an appropriate break in the program, we're going to give them a minute to just acknowledge and welcome.
Okay. So
we'll go to the video.
We can go to the video. So thank you, and sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, Barbara. Michael, you can launch the video.
Oceans. They are all over the world and are used every day. So why do we disrespect them? Instead of sitting around searching for an answer, we need to act now and solve the problem. If we do not act immediately, our problem will get worse and soon become irreversible. Our pollution is causing both our animals and oceans to die, and we need to put an end to plastic pollution. Pollution has become a big part of everyday life for people all over the world. So what is polluting our oceans? Today, our oceans are being polluted mostly by plastics. Plastics are used every day by people all over the world. Plastics are used to make water bottles, bags, and other consumer products. About 100 billion plastic bags are used by Americans each and every year, and about 500 billion to 1 trillion plastic bags are used around the world each year. Plastic bottles that are used to hold liquids are also widely used and unfortunately not recycled properly and are later thrown into our oceans, leaving them to become polluted. In 2010, 21% of clear plastic bottles were recycled, but unfortunately those numbers will get worse if we do not stop plastic pollution from occurring. When our plastic bags enter the ocean, they split up into smaller pieces from the ocean waves and the sun. However, even though these plastics may break up, they still do not disappear. This is because the plastic is made out of clear pellets called resin that do not dissolve in water. So instead, animals eat these smaller pieces and are then affected by it. Once the animals eat the plastic, they can become ill and die. Animals can get tangled up in the trash and will die later on from being strangled. Animals also eat the trash, which is thrown into the ocean by humans. They eat the trash, mistaking it for food, and then it gets into their bodies and punctures their organs. The chemicals that are in the plastic are poisonous and are then absorbed into the animal's body, causing them to die. Seabirds are also greatly affected by our plastic. About 1 million seabirds die each year from plastic pollution in the water in which they live. Unfortunately, that is not all. 100,000 marine mammals also die each year from the pollution. Turtles often eat plastic bags, mistaking them for jellyfish, and will die later on from either being tangled in the bag or ingesting it. Plastic trash also threatens humans because the plastic that is eaten by animals such as fish will later be used as seafood for humans. People will then eat the fish with the plastic chemicals inside of it. This pollution also harms people when they swim in highly contaminated water. How does this trash get into our waters? About 80% of all the trash in the ocean comes from land and is put there by humans. The other 20% of the trash has fallen off of ships. After the plastic gets into our oceans, it is collected into a swarm of currents, which is known as a gyre. There are 5 major gyres in the world: the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, or North Pacific Gyre, the North Atlantic Gyre, the Indian Ocean Gyre, the South Pacific Gyre, and the South Atlantic Gyre. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is the largest gyre. It consists of 2 piles of garbage floating in the ocean. One garbage patch is located near the coast of California and is twice the size of Texas. The other is located off the coast of Japan and is just as big. Sadly, 100 million tons of plastic are floating around in these patches. After plastic trash gets into the ocean gyres, they stay there for a while and they never disappear because plastic is biodegradable and stays in the water for decades. The amount of pollution in our waters will just grow and get worse. According to the Ocean Cleanup, plastic pollution causes at least $13 billion in damage every year to industries that include fishing, shipping, and tourism. And the cost of removing debris from beaches averages $1,500 per ton and can reach up to $25,000 per ton. In the United States, California spends about $500 million each year to clean up their beaches, which are widely polluted. Oceans are very important to us and our wildlife. We need to stop throwing our plastics away and start recycling them. Recycling them will help our world save money because we will not have to pay for a cleanup. To stop our pollution problem, be more cautious about where your plastics go when you recycle them. Carry around reusable water bottles instead of the single-use plastic water bottles, and carry around reusable tote bags instead of using a plastic bag once and throwing it away. Please, help save our oceans from our plastics and turn our oceans from this into this. Let's put an end to this pollution.
Okay, thank you so much. Michael, you can spotlight me so that I can share with folks a few opening notes before we see our first speaker. Thank you. Welcome everybody. So glad you could join today. My name is Gloria Boyce Charles from the Eastern Queens Alliance. That video I hope was enlightening for you, and you would be interested to know that it was developed by a middle schooler who was the winner of a 2015-2016 academic year student contest that was run by Bow Street, or Bowseat, which is a nonprofit ocean awareness program. And so this young person did the research and coordinated the videotaping of and the script writing of this production. Today we're focusing in on plastic, and you will notice that our emphasis initially especially is on plastics and the proliferation of them in our oceans. And we do this in honor of the fact that March 22nd was annual World Water Day. It's a part of a UN initiative that's been going on since 1993, I believe. And it really highlights and reminds us of the fact that there are about 2 billion people in the world who do not have access to clean and safe water. And we are very fortunate, many of us in the United States, not to have those kinds of concerns, but they're very real for a lot of people in the world. And so one of the reasons and one of the problems is plastic and the proliferation of it in our oceans. So today we begin with an emphasis on that. And we have a couple of speakers who are going to address that. And also we'll end with a discussion of the impact of plastic to human beings. And that's very significant as well. And hopefully you'll walk away with a few things that you'll think about doing differently in your day-to-day life, and also some have an awareness of some of the legislation that's out there to deal with these important issues, and think about ways that you can advocate for that. So that's our goal today. We're joined by, I want to point out that in the chat, there is a PDF of our program that introduces and gives you background on our speakers. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is share my screen, and hopefully you can see what our agenda is for the day. So whenever they join us, we'll be able to hear a few remarks from the Honorable Donovan Richards Jr., who is our Queens Borough President and one of our co-sponsors, and also from the Honorable Sylvina Brooks Powers, who is our District 31 New York City Council member and Majority Whip. And we're going to have our first presentation from Ms. Cara Napolitano, who is the Outreach and Education Coordinator with the Sims Municipal Recycling Facility. She's going to talk about recycling plastics in New York City, which is very appropriate given the little video that we just saw, talking about the importance of how we dispose of plastics properly so that they can be recycled. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Jenna Jambeck, a distinguished professor and senior researcher out of the University of Georgia. She's going to talk about why plastics are so harmful to our oceans and why it matters. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Leonardo Trasande. Those of you who are followers of the EQA know that we have invited him to speak with our community on numerous occasions, and he'll address the topic of how are plastics harmful to our health. And we'll just end with a few concluding remarks. So that's our agenda for the day, just making you aware that, you know, we've got a couple of other presentations coming up going forward. We hope to have that Waste Expo for you next month at the Idlewild Environmental Center site. That's certainly the goal. That would be an in-person not presentation, but experience where you could come out and learn more and do some hands-on stuff in that regard. And we're going to end up with a session on what is industrial waste and why is it an environmental justice issue, and that should take place in May. So we've got some other things coming up, and we hope you'll join us for them all. So without further ado, one of the things we like to do before we bring on each presenter is give you an opportunity to check your own knowledge about the topics that we're getting ready to discuss, and kind of get you thinking about some of the things that we're getting ready to discuss. We do a little poll. So we're going to start off with our poll. We call it the waste not IQ. IQ, yeah, waste not IQ. Let's start off with a little poll. Hold on now. All righty. In New York, can you all see this? In New York, curbside plastic, metal, glass, and paper recyclables from residents and schools are picked up by the New York Sanitation Department and, so what's your answer there? Taken directly to a barge to be shipped overseas, taken to a materials recovery facility to be sorted and processed, or taken directly to a landfill. And then the second question, which is an example of how items are generally treated in a circular economy? We generally use an item once and throw it away. We use an item multiple times but discard it when it is no longer functional or attractive. Once we can no longer use an item, we send it to be repaired, recycled, or repurposed rather than discarded. Can everybody see the full questions and answers? Okay, so just register in. I'll give you a second or two. And I'm going to end the poll about now. Looks like 22 people have responded. Let's see. Give me a second here. Okay. Okay.
It's ended.
Yeah. Okay, so do you see the results? So most people, 20, wow. That's good. 20 people got that right, taken to a materials recovery facility to be sorted and processed. And Ms. Cara Napolitano is going to talk with us more about that, which is an example of a circular economy. Let's see how we did here. 18 out of 22 people got that. Once we can no longer, a circular economy. Once we can no longer use an item, we don't just throw it away. We see how we can repurpose it or repair it, so that we no longer have to be thinking about anything being waste, but something as being a resource for something else, right? So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our first presenter, Miss Cara Napolitano, and she's going to be introduced, and the conversation will be facilitated by Mr. Charles Davis, who is the Sergeant at Arms from one of our affiliated EQA civic organizations, the Rosedale Civic Association. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles and Cara. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, Cara. It's good to have you here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And we appreciate your knowledge and wisdom on the subject we're about to go over it now. So we have about 10 minutes, and so we want to give you as much time to respond to the questions as possible. So I'm going to give you the first question. And also I want people to know that she's been doing this for 15 years. So she knows what she's doing, right? And she's one of the largest materials recovery facilities in New York, in the country, not the city, the country. So
Possibly in the world as well.
Probably in the world. So she's been busy. So that's that you show everybody can do something to help with the waste. So our first question would be to you, Cara, is what is the role of SIMS in New York City recovery the process? What marks do you serve, and what is the role in the role as a MRF? And you can explain what a MRF is.
Yep, sure thing. So I work for the company SIMS Municipal Recycling. And just to clarify, I've been with SIMS for about 3.5 years. I've been an educator for 15 years. So new-ish with this specific company. But SIMS Municipal Recycling, we operate what's called a material recovery facility, or a MRF. If you haven't heard of a MRF, other than being kind of a silly acronym, it's actually a very common type of facility. A MRF is a sorting facility for recyclables. So at home, we mix different materials right into our recycling bins. They are collected and they travel to a MRF, where we have the technology and the ability to sort the metal from the glass, from the plastic. We really don't want to be sorting all of that from the trash. However, we really just are set up to sort out the different recyclable materials. So SIMS, our Brooklyn location, our New York City locations do this for all of New York City's residential recycling. And there was a bit more of that question. There were 3 questions there, I think, but that's what we do at SIMS. That's our purpose.
I said, what markets do you serve, and what is the role of MRF? We answered that.
Sure. Okay, great. That's what a MRF is. But so I guess the markets that we serve, I mean, we are receiving all of your recyclables. If you live in any of the 5 boroughs, anywhere in New York City, all of the recyclables from all of the homes in all of the public schools will come to us for sorting. All of the metal, glass, plastic, and carton recycling. So those are the materials that we sort, and those are the materials that we then sell to reprocessors, right? Metals will go to a smelter, plastics go to what's called a plastic reclaimer, paper to a paper mill, and so on. And most of the reprocessors that we're selling to are actually domestic. They're up and down the East Coast, buying New York City's recycled materials from us.
Okay, so let's move on to our next question then. So with that being said, let's focus on recycling of plastics waste in New York City.
Yes.
All right. What is the amount of recycled plastics generated by residents and schools or businesses and such forth?
Yes. So I am a visual person as an educator. So I'm going to pop up a slide to show you these because now we're going to get into numbers, and some people might be number people, but some people might be more on the visual side. So are you able to see that picture? Okay. Is that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So this is my favorite pie chart. And this pie chart represents all of New York City's waste. So just a couple of things you can see. You can see that 34% of our waste is actually recyclable in either the paper bin or the metal, glass, plastic bin. Another 34% of our waste is actually compostable. We're not going to get into that today, but that's a whole other story. But what we find from all of our waste, all of the things we throw away in New York City. Let's see if I can actually make it go forward. Yes, about 15% of our waste is plastic, but it doesn't all fit into this recyclable category, right? Not all of the plastic waste we generate is recyclable. So when we look at it a little bit differently, these pie charts, I'm not going to go through all the little words, but I am going to say that on the right, this is breaking down 7.5% of our waste, which is non-recyclable plastic, like plastic bags. We call it plastic film or plastic wrappers, or foam, right? Like a foam egg carton or a foam cup. Much of this is actually banned. Foam is actually banned in New York City and New York State, but it still makes up a percentage of our waste. So the other 7.4%, that's the rigid plastic. And those are the things those are the plastics we can actually put in our recycling bin in New York City. So about half of our plastic waste actually belongs in that recycling bin. So another part of that question, I think, was the trends. I'm not sure if you asked about kind of trends.
Right. There's a bit of increase or decrease.
Yep. So I can show you that as well. And these most recent numbers come from a study done in 2017. New York City does what's called a waste characterization study every few years, and they take samples from waste from all over the city. They organize it all, they weigh everything, they categorize it so that the city knows what are we throwing away, what is our waste looking like in New York City, and how are trends changing over time. So they know how much we're recycling correctly, how much we're recycling incorrectly, all of the things. So the last number that I'm going to throw up there is from 2017. It'll be interesting to see next year when the next one comes out, how it has changed again. But you can see the percentage of plastic in our waste has stayed pretty stagnant, interestingly enough, right? It stayed pretty similar since 2005. This like tiny little jump, if you can even call, I don't even know if that could be considered significant, from 4.2 to 4.9%. So I'm very curious. In 2023, the next study should be coming out. So, I'm waiting with bated breath to see what the changes are. But another thing we can look at is something called the capture rate, right? So I've told you when we look at all of our waste, what percentage of it is plastic. But now let's talk about what percentage of the recyclable plastic are we as New Yorkers actually putting into the correct recycling bin. And that's called capture rate. What percentage of a recyclable material is actually ending up in the correct bin and being captured for recycling? So let's look at those numbers over time. So it's split into two categories, right? Because even within the categories of recyclable plastic, there are more categories. You can really continue to break it down. So the poster children of recyclable plastic are going to be bottles like water bottles or soda bottles, and jugs, like milk jugs, water jugs, detergent jugs. So you can see there's been a little jump in how well we as New Yorkers are recycling our bottles and jugs. There was this jump in 2013, but then it stayed kind of the same. You know, we haven't unfortunately gotten better at recycling these very recyclable types of plastic. What we see on the bottom row, that represents other rigid or other hard plastics like yogurt cups, to-go containers, and bulky plastics. So this is interesting because you see this jump. This is a significant jump from 2013 to 2017, right? But that's
Right.
because in 2013 and previously, that type of plastic wasn't accepted in our recycling program. So starting in 2013, New Yorkers then were supposed to be putting all rigid plastic in their recycling bins. So we then see this little leap in 2017 where people are starting to catch on and realize, oh, I can recycle all my rigid plastic, not just the bottles and jugs. But that's also why, you know, we have 50% for bottles and jugs and only 27 for other rigid. It takes time for people to learn and realize and to educate 8.5 million plus people how to recycle correctly. But these are the numbers.
Okay, so I got one last question for you. So me being at home, you know, what's the best practice? What can I do to help you know, recycle plastics at my house? So, you know, to help the situation.
Yes. So first of all, in New York City, you may place, again, all rigid plastic in your recycling bin. Now, I'm not telling you that all of that rigid plastic is truly recyclable, but I'm telling you most of it is. And so for simplicity's sake, the city is telling people, look, I mean, recycling can be confusing, we know, so we're trying to make it simple and saying just any rigid plastic, you know, any plastic that keeps its shape when you set it on the counter, put it in the bin. Any plastic, yep, exactly. Any plastic that doesn't keep its shape, you know, you set it on the counter, it just kind of falls over, doesn't belong in the bin. So that's what you can do in New York City as far as recycling. If you live outside of New York City, you need to check your local guidelines, okay? Because recycling guidelines can be slightly different depending on where you are located. I can tell you wherever you are located, you can probably and almost definitely recycle bottles and jugs, and then include shampoo bottles, that includes colorful jugs like detergent bottles. Bottles and jugs tend to be a sure thing. But then going beyond recycling, just reduce and reuse. You know, the other two R words are far more important and far more impactful. And look, I'm a recycling educator. I want you to recycle right, but I'll be the first one to tell you that's not enough. We need to incorporate the other two R words of reduction and reuse. And I just encourage you, if you're feeling like you need to cut out plastics from your lives, you know, if you're feeling you want to try that, it's a rough journey, but I support you trying whatever feels right for you. Just be careful. We don't want to replace one single-use item with another single-use item. That won't work. You need to replace a single-use item with a reusable item, and then commit to reusing that reusable item for a long time. That is when we really see an impact in reuse. Don't buy 10 reusable water bottles or 10 shopping bags. Like you buy a couple and use them for a long time.
Okay, I think I can do that.
Great.
So I understand that you have a virtual tour of the SIM facility that you'd like to show us.
Yes, I'm going to take you all on a quick tour through our facility out in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. So again, I've popped up a slide. Are you able to see the slides okay?
Yes.
Yes, great, wonderful. So this is us. This is Sims Municipal Recycling. We are located on an 11-acre pier right on the waterfront in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. You can see our very large facility. You can see we have solar panels, we have a wind turbine. It's a really lovely place to visit, and I'm hoping to start in-person tours again in the summer or fall. So if you can make it out, do come visit. It's pretty neat. We have a great visitor center. So again, we are a material recovery facility, and we sort 100% of New York City's residential, meaning coming from all homes and all public schools, metal, glass, and plastic recycling. And that ends up being about 1,000 tons of materials a day, which I'll tell you, that's a lot. As far as MRFs go, as far as facilities like ours go, 1,000 tons a day is a very, very large tonnage. And that is really what makes us the largest MRF in the country, if not in the world. So let's see if I can go forward. Yay. All right, so because I have all of your attention, I have to briefly go through this, right? First, I want to tell you what goes in the bin so that I can show you what happens to it after you put it in the bin. So first of all, in New York City, we have a dual stream recycling program. That means we separate our recyclables into 2 bins, okay? If you live outside of New York City, your recycling program might not work that way. You might have only 1 bin for all of your recyclables. But in New York City, it's 2 bins, and it's important that you do this correctly. All right, so in the blue bin, we accept 4 materials. I will get to plastic, but first I just want to review. You can also recycle anything that is at least 50% metal, anything. Soda cans, tin cans, pots and pans, aluminum foil, bed frames, microwaves, air conditioners, anything that's mostly metal, as long as it's no longer working and no longer of use to you, right? So metal, glass, only glass bottles and jars, okay? Only bottles and jars when it comes to glass, no other type of glass. And that rule, that applies to really all recycling programs that accept glass. The third item in the blue bin is cartons. New Yorkers, cartons go in the blue bin, okay? It's very confusing, I know, because you look at a carton and you often think, oh, it's paper. But cartons are actually cardboard boxes coated in the thing we're talking about today, plastic. It has a layer of plastic on the inside and the outside to keep the milk from seeping through, right? You need that layer. So because of that plastic, we put cartons in the blue bin with other plastic items. So the last material that belongs in that blue bin, rigid plastic. And as I said before, in New York City, you are to place all rigid or hard plastic in this blue recycling bin. Okay, we don't have to worry about the numbers in the little recycling chasing arrow symbols. We don't use those in New York City to distinguish what you should and should not put in the bin, just rigid plastic. Briefly, the green bin, it's so much simpler. It's all your paper and all your cardboard. And I do just want to slip this in because I've been hearing this bunk rumor that pizza boxes are not recyclable in New York City, and that is so untrue. In New York City, we absolutely want your pizza boxes, even if they have grease on them. Just be sure to take the pizza out of the box first, okay? But we're not here to talk about paper. Everything else then, if it's not one of those accepted items, goes in the trash bin. Now, I'm not here to talk about compost, but I will say if you have the opportunity to compost, please compost. If you have a brown bin, use it. If you have an ability to drop things off at a drop-off location, do it. You know, you want to talk about making an impact, recycle. Yeah, cool, but compost. Compost. Again, it's just dropping in little important things. Okay, so back to the recycling process. After you do your part, you put the right thing in the right bin. In New York City, Department of Sanitation trucks, DSNY trucks, will then come to your home and collect your recyclables and then bring them to Sims. So that was a truck unloading at Sims where I work. But some recyclables also travel to us on barges, great big boats that travel down the East River, bringing us recyclables. You know, we're in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. We're a bit on the southern side of New York City, of the 5 boroughs, a bit. So recyclables coming from the Bronx, from Queens. I'm a Long Island City resident. I actually, my recyclables travel to Sims on a barge, but our recyclables will be collected by truck and then transloaded onto a barge. And then it all arrives at Sims. So this room is called our tipping floor. It's a giant room full of a giant mountain of, or mountains on some days, of mixed recyclables. So that green claw in the background is scooping recyclables off a barge and then throwing them onto the pile. This is the room where the trucks unload and the barges are unloaded and the materials await sortation. And that pile, it's always big. It always looks like this. Oh, that's sad that it's skipping. There we go. It gets bigger, you know, after holidays, after snow days, and during global pandemics when everyone stays home and no one goes to work. And so all the waste shifts over to the home. All right, so that's the pile of stuff we have to sort. This is a picture of the system that we use at Sims Municipal Recycling to sort 1,000 tons of metal, glass, plastic a day. I'll show you what this looks like in person as well. So it is a giant room full of about 2.5 miles of conveyor belts that move recyclables through a series of technologies and human power that sort the metal from the glass, from the plastic, from the cartons. And I'll show you the kind of key pieces of technology that we're using in here to sort those materials. But all of this, the big pile and this room, you get to see all of this in person if you come visit us. So do consider it when it becomes available again. All right, so the process. We need to load the system. We need to get that big pile of stuff into that big maze of conveyor belts. Yes, so we're going to use a front end loader. That yellow vehicle pushes the recyclables in. That is the entry point that they're pushing those materials into. Now our view is going to shift a bit to the left. And we see the Liberator, like very serious sounding. So this blue thing is the Liberator. Recyclables, after they're pushed in down here, they travel up this conveyor belt and dump into the Liberator. The Liberator is a slow speed shredder that rips open these plastic recycling bags. Now, New York City is a bit unique in that we handle collections. We collect recyclables and trash, but recyclables is what I deal with at Sims. We collect them in clear plastic bags. You know, if you live outside of New York City, you might be saying, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to put my recyclables out in plastic bags. I know you're probably not, but in New York City, we don't have room for dumpsters or bins at the moment. Some people are working on that, but we don't have room for bins large enough to set materials out in for collection. So we use bags. So our Liberator at Sims, it just rips those bags open. We're going to kind of zoom in. We can't see the Liberator because it's inside here, but you can see materials falling out the bottom. So the shredder, it really just rips open the bags, and then the pieces of bags and the contents all fall onto that bottom conveyor belt, and it all heads into the system for sorting. So quickly, I'll show you how we sort. The first material we remove is glass. I know we're not talking about glass, but it is a significant part of the waste stream. So these metal rods spin and everything rolls over it. You can see this is at the beginning of the process. So they're all a mix of materials in here. The spinning metal rods, they're really meant to break the glass, right? The glass bounces over, breaks into small pieces, falls through. There's another conveyor belt below that catches the glass and carries it away. A struggle or a challenge with these disc screens is that things like those plastic recycling bags or all of the other plastic bags that no one should be putting in their recycling bin, but they still do, they get tangled up in these disc screens and in some other parts of our facility. But this is a big one where tangling can happen. So please don't put plastic bags in your recycling bin. Thank you very much. So the glass is gone. Then metal, super simple. We have a giant spinning magnet and then an opposite magnet called an eddy current that ejects non-magnetic metal. That's how we're pulling out the metals. And then for plastics and cartons, we use what's called an optical scanner. So optical scanners, you can think of them like very smart cameras. Materials fly by on the conveyor belt and they pass under. You can see this line of light right here. That's the scanner, that's the camera. It is using near infrared light to identify the chemical makeup of the materials that pass by. So it can tell, oh, that's this type of plastic, or that's that type of plastic, or that's a carton, or what have you. We can program it to look for different types of plastics. So then when it finds what it's looking for, it turns on an air jet at the end of the conveyor belt. So just a little example, the camera finds what it wants and then pew, 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 pew. That right shoots it up and over a barrier. And we have 16 of these at our facility. So we are really able to we're able to sort multiple materials and multiple types of plastic. I think we can see it in slow-mo as well, which is kind of fun. So this line of light is the scanner. This is looking for colorful plastic. So that white thing's going to go up. That green thing kind of looks like they get sucked up. Everything else just goes out and falls down. All right, now all that technology is pretty great, but it is not perfect. So at our facility, the last step will be humans doing a final sort. This heroic human is working on the colorful plastic line. This type of plastic is called HDPE. We call it HDPE color because it's dyed a color. Our baler then compresses the sorted recyclables into bales, and that is what we make. A MRF sorts and makes bales. We make a variety of bales. These are only a few. We make more than these, but I have a few different types of plastic here. These are really the heavy hitters in the recycling industry. These are the plastics that are recyclable. PP stands for polypropylene. That one's recyclable some of the time. But remember, New Yorkers, all rigid plastic goes in your bin. And at Sims, we have the technology to take care of the rest. Then the bales leave Sims. We sell them. We put them on trucks or we put them on train cars, and they go to companies that use them to make new things. Now I'm almost at the end of my journey because the next step is not taking place at Sims. Just to be clear, these are the companies we sell to, we work with, that then actually use the recycled materials to make new products. So just some quick examples. Your water bottle, it's going to go to a plastic reclaimer. They chop it up into flakes. They wash those flakes. They remove the label. They separate out the cap, and it'll still be used, but it's a different type of plastic. So it'll end up in a different stream. They melt the plastics and turn them into pellets. These are plastic pellets that will be sold again to another company that might use them to make more water bottles, but honestly, that doesn't happen a lot. That is the goal, the circular goal, right? Bottle to bottle. But currently, it is more common that your plastic water bottles will be used to make clothing or carpeting. That currently happens a lot. So I just like to consider bottle to bottle, great, but that bottle is going to be in use for about 10 minutes and then become waste again. That carpet could be in use for 5, maybe 10 years if you love the carpet. So you would need to really do a more in-depth comparison to decide which is better. Not a lot of places to recycle carpets at the moment, however, so many factors to consider. Colorful plastic, similar process, but there isn't currently a way to remove color from plastic when recycling it into something new. So often they end up getting mixed together. And in New York City, our detergent jugs are often purchased by companies that use them to make these big black drainage pipes. Milk jugs similar process. So I'm sort of skipping the process on these, but they can become a number of products, from bulky products like containers to more shampoo bottles or cleaning containers, or even toys in some cases. And then your yogurt cups, that plastic is called polypropylene. It can be used for car parts, like a dashboard on a car, or even very dense furniture or containers and crates. And that's recycling. But after I talk to people about recycling for any moment of time, I just like to remind you that reducing and reusing more impactful. So please try to do those 2 things first. And as a last resort, recycle and recycle right. And that's what I have to tell you. And there's my contact info and our website if you want to look up when we're offering in-person tours again.
Well, that was informative.
Great. I tried to go, had less time, so I try to move.
I think you got it in.
Great.
Okay, Gloria. So we're going to turn it back to you so we can move on. But
Okay.
Listen, reduce and reuse. Reduce and reuse. Just get it in.
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Kara? Because we can take a few questions. And then we want to just introduce you to a few of our electeds who've joined us today. Any questions? Kara?
Gloria, I see in the chat, they asked if the slides were available. Can,
Oh,
I can send over a PDF. Yep, absolutely. I'll share that with Eastern Queens Alliance.
I have a question. This is Faye Hill. I have a question. Sometimes the sanitation people come by and they throw everything inside their trucks. Sometimes I don't know if it's laziness, they put the recycle as well as the regular garbage. How is that being divided? Is it possible?
So if you see that happening, if you see a truck collecting garbage, the black bags along with recyclables, please report it to 311. That should not be happening. And honestly, that's really frowned upon within DSNY. They very well know that that is not helping anyone and should not be done. But what you might see is paper recycling seeming to go into the same truck as metal, glass, plastic recycling. And that is actually okay because recycling trucks, most of the collection trucks in New York City that collect recyclables have two containers. They're called split body trucks. One side for paper, one side for metal, glass, plastic cartons. But if you do see someone mixing recyclables with trash, please do report it.
Okay, if I can catch them, but I've seen it happen a lot of times.
Then if you see it in a certain location, report the location and they'll be able to track which truck was on that route.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure thing.
Good, great presentation.
My pleasure. I do see a couple of questions in the chat
Yeah.
as well that I'm happy to get to if you'd like.
yeah, go ahead, take them. Should caps be left on bottles or put in
Yes.
tins loose?
Okay, so with caps, I have a rhyme for you that someone named Ben from Reusable Solutions came up with. So for caps, if it's the same, it should remain. So plastic cap stays with plastic bottle. If it's the same, it should remain. If it's not, pop the top. So like in the case of a glass jar with a metal lid, remove the top and then recycle. And then will you ever add plastic film recycling? Honestly, I don't see that happening soon. It's tricky, plastic film, plastic bags, it's really difficult to sort this stuff. It's flimsy, it's tangly, it's kind of delicate. It tangles up with other materials and can be hard to efficiently, effectively separate it from other materials. So right now, if you want to recycle something like this, it's not the best solution. You have to take it to participating stores, like Target will do it, Stop and Shop might do it. You can go to plasticfilmrecycling.org. I'll pop that into the chat and look up locations, but it's tough. It's not the most convenient.
Okay, we'll take one more. Does the city earn a profit from the materials sold to reprocessing companies? That's a good question.
Yes. So they can. The challenge with recycling is that it is an incredibly volatile market. The value of these materials can go up and down, and the operation costs that we have to pay at recycling facilities, they just stay. Our fees don't change, but the value of what we're selling can dramatically change. But when markets are good, and Sims makes enough to cover operations and then crosses a certain threshold of sales, then we do revenue share with the city. And that does happen. That can change from month to month, but it happens often.
Thank you. I'm going to say thank you so much, Kara Napolitano, for that really informative
Gloria?
presentation.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, there are two hands in the chat. Mine is one and Crystal Brown.
And I'll go ahead and I'll type answers in the chat also to questions in the chat that you don't get to. I'll write back to people.
The hands up?
There are
Okay.
two hands, yeah.
All right.
I had a question and Crystal Brown, I see her hand is up. So if you separate the recyclables in your home, is it okay to put them in the same container that you put out in the street?
What do you mean? Like
So if you put your papers in one bag and your plastics in another? Is it okay to put them in the same receptacle that goes out?
You do want to keep paper and cardboard separate from metal, glass, plastic, and cartons. That's a New York City thing. If you put them in the same bin, it's a chance that they could end up in the wrong place. So that's one reason that we use bags often in New York City. It's your paper in one bag, metal, glass, plastic in another bag, clear bag. And then the one other, Crystal.
Someone else's hand is up. I think, Crystal, did we answer your question?
Thank you, Gloria. Actually, I have another question. Thank you, Gloria, Barbara, your EQA team. Kara, your presentation, magnificent, fascinating. So the question is, if there is your presentation made available to public schools? Because sometimes change within a family happens when the young people advocate for change. So I think it'd be fabulous to have it made available to all the public schools, even with their sound effects that were so funny. Thank you for that. Thank you.
That's a big part of my job. We have an interactive recycling museum at Sims that we had public schools there every day, you know, in the before time. But in the last 2 years, I've moved over to virtual, and I'm doing virtual tours with students every day, multiple a day usually. So looking forward to having the kiddos back in person, hopefully soon. But in the meantime, I'm virtually up on their smart boards every day.
Thank you. And may I just ask a follow-up question to my earlier one? If the city makes even a small profit from selling the recyclable materials to processing plants, why doesn't the city do more to advertise and publicize recycling so that it's a full circle? Everyone benefits from that. Thank you.
Yeah, because unfortunately, the Department of Sanitation keeps getting their budget cut. They have a huge job, a very important job. And unfortunately, they just keep experiencing budget cuts. They are an often overlooked city agency, tragically. So that's really why we're not making enough to support the price of advertising. Advertising can get very expensive.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
So Kara, you're going to answer some of those
I'll
questions
type back. Yeah,
in the chat. That would be great. Thank you so much. And
my pleasure.
before we proceed, this was great. Before we proceed, we want to just introduce and acknowledge some of the electeds who are in the House and some of our co-sponsors. We have the Honorable Donovan Richards Jr., our Queensborough President. Why don't you say a few words, and followed by the Honorable Alicia Hyman, our 29th New York Assembly District member. And
Thank you so much, Gloria, to Barbara. Thank you so much for doing this, because often, you know, I find our communities are the ones that are lacking in education in many fields around the environment. And obviously in my former capacity as chairman of the Environmental Protection Committee, I can tell you that this is phenomenal to see Black and Brown led organizations having these conversations. I think the only other organization per se that I know that really operates in these spaces is probably We Act of Harlem. And they're another, I know they're partners with y'all as well. So I just want to thank Barbara and Gloria and all of you for continuing these conversations. And of course, acknowledge my colleagues. And to Kara, I look forward. I know I'm doing a tour of your facility, I think in a week or two. So I'm looking forward to my field trip there, I think next week or the week after. But so good to see so many faces on the line this morning talking trash. One of my favorite subjects, certainly. In all seriousness, though, as a former chair of the City Council's Environmental Protection Committee, I am hyper aware of how important it is not only discard our plastic and our waste in an environmentally friendly way, but also about how it impacts the local community directly. And Kara alluded to the conversation around education. It's one of the reasons why, you know, during my tenure in the council, we created the Greener NYC initiative, in which Eastern Queens Alliance, I know, has been a recipient, because we need to actually ensure that our young people are also being educated on the importance of recycling, environmental education. You know, I sponsored the Green Roofs Bill, so we're going to now require every building in the city that's about 25,000 square feet or more to have solar panels, wind turbines, green roofs on it. So it's really about making sure that we pass this information down. And part of that money also goes into cleanups as well. And all 51 council members are actually able to tap into that. And, you know, just on the conversation around plastics, you know, it's all about a change in our behavior, right? You know, taking personal responsibility. It's one of the reasons why Barbara may see me at a supermarket. If I forget my reusable bag, I punish myself by carrying all my goods out looking ridiculous, the eggs, the milk carton, and I will pack it all in my car if I forget that reusable bag, because I was one of the lead co-sponsors. So people will look at me crazy in the supermarket, and I'm like, listen, I got to lead by example on this. But I remember when we did the 5 cents bill, how controversial it was, how, you know, there was this, there were these declarations by folks who said, well, Black and brown New Yorkers are not going to be able to adjust to the 5 cents plastic bag, the ban on plastic bags, but certainly the 5 cent surcharge. But when you go to any supermarket in our neighborhood, you can certainly see that our communities have adjusted to it, and people are bringing their reusable bags. So I just say that to add that, yes, with education, of course, there were some carve outs if people were on public assistance. But even those individuals, if you go to the supermarkets, you'll see them actually recycling. You know, some other just quick things we can do, like you go out to a local restaurant, you go to McDonald's, you know, they want to throw plastic in your bag. You know, I quite frankly think we should technically ban them from doing it. But that's just my opinion. You know, do they need to put all these utensils when you're going home to eat, right? You know, in a bag. So there should at least be an option there as well, to make sure that they're not necessarily adding to the burdens of that. You know, Kara touched on something that's important, and it's certainly a top priority for us. You know, this year, you know, the sanitation department's budget continuously gets cut. One of the things we've responded to the mayor's budget this week. Of course, by charter, I have to. And we've obviously called for, one, restoring the composting budget, but also bringing sanitation back up to where the levels of funding that they need to actually, you know, do the things we're talking about on this line: recycling, cleaning our streets. You know, I just did a tour on Jamaica Avenue with my colleagues. I'm just not happy with where we're at as a community. And even as we talk about public safety, you know, crime, garbage breeds quality of life issues, right? If you see an unkempt neighborhood, it adds and compounds onto other things. So we are looking to push for that money to be restored in the budget. And once again, just wanted to add those things and say thank you for continuing this conversation. Definitely want to thank all of you for being up on a Saturday morning discussing these important matters. And once again, we are the change that we seek, right? So it's all about personal behavior. Of course, we have decisions to make on a personal level, but if we all do our part, guess what? We can reduce carbon emissions, we can keep our communities clean, and we can reduce our plastic use capacity as a borough and city. So thank you for doing this once again. Good to see all of you on a Saturday morning, and I'll see you along the way. Thank you. Gloria, I think you're muted.
Hi, sorry. Thank you, Borough President. Assemblymember Hindman.
Thank you very much, Gloria, and thank you to Eastern Queens Alliance for constantly being the voice of reason when it comes to waste. Excuse me, as if you hear the lawnmowers going on in the background. So very quickly, I would just want to remind everyone that on the state level, we passed banning the plastic bag across the state. And the difference is, I will tell you, having visited Covanta in Garden City, Long Island, and Sims, and seeing what people do with waste was and is a true eye-opener. In my house, we don't buy bottles of water. We use a filter system so that we can cut down on our waste personally. And I think it's important to also underscore that in your November ballot, there will be the Bond Act. And that will have a dedicated revenue stream for environmental issues that face us. I hope everyone votes yes. I see Rebecca has a thumbs up, and encouraging our community, which is a group of dedicated voters, to vote yes on the Bond Act. Also want to highlight, I just want to make sure I get this acronym correct, the CLPCA, which is on a state level, the climate action. We talked about that in our state budget also. So I don't want you to think, that waste matters everywhere. I have visited Sims, I have visited Covanta, and with Sims, I'm just glad that they are able to move waste by rail and by water. Unfortunately, in our area where we have 3 waste facilities, we do have a glass recycling business in Southeast Queens, and you should see the work that they do in recycling glass and using it, repurposing the glass. We have 2 waste facilities on Douglas Avenue. And one of the things that I'm hoping we could do is also move waste by rail to get rid of the diesel trucks, of the tonnage that happens on our streets that comes right here in Southeast Queens. And I'd also like to underscore a bill that I have introduced. I'm gonna ask Philip is on, my legislative director, to put the bill number in the chat so you can read it, which is an act to amend the environmental conservation law in recycling plastic. Kara did such a great job of talking about all the plastic that's recycled, but not all about, what about all the plastic that does not get recycled? Where does that plastic go? It goes to our landfills and it's burned in incinerators. This bill recycles plastic and for another use. So I have some examples that I have here. This is not recyclable, but it goes in our waste. And where does it go? Into our facilities. And not everything that you have at home that's plastic can be recycled in its current form. If we look at states like Pennsylvania and Virginia, and what they're doing for a sustainable future, I would really like everyone to think about how we use plastic and what happens to it. And this method reuses that plastic. It recycles it into another form that we can use the bottles. And I think about all of the beauty products I buy at home. The gel products, making sure that we can use them to create these sustainable PBA-free plastics. I think it's really important that, like someone said, our children really educate us sometimes on what we're doing to the planet. And hopefully with this bill, if passed in this legislative session, will allow the recycling of plastic for those that are not going into facilities like Sims that's able to recycle plastic, but in the state of New York, trying to make sure that our landfills and incinerators that do plastic does not break down. As the video of that young woman that you showed, it ends up in our oceans. And then that is really, I think, scary, is that it can outlive us and contaminate our environment. So we have to find ways to recycle plastic that's not able to be sold via Sims. So the information is in the chat. Barbara, thank you for your leadership. Gloria, thank you for allowing me this time. And I'm also the chair of solid waste in the state of New York. The subcommittee chair, it's the subcommittee. But it has allowed me to really open my eyes and really educate our community on how important making sure our future is better for our children and how we utilize waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Very interesting and helpful information about legislation that we can be advocating for. And we need to really, get a fact sheet out to everybody and keep this front and center in your minds so that, we can all help to make, to remedy the situation. Do we have any other electeds in the House at this point in time? Okay, so I'd like to now introduce Mr. Mortimer Lawrence, and he is on the staff of one of our co-sponsors, City Council member Sylvina Brooks Powers. So he's going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jenna Jambeck. Mac?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Mortimer Lawrence, but I go by Mac Lawrence. I am a Southeast Queens native, local environmentalist, constituent affairs manager for Councilwoman Selena Brooks Powers, Majority Whip, and also a Queens Solid Waste Advisory Board member. It is my honor to, be here today and speak about an important issue that, is really dear to the heart, but also dear to our health and our environment for our future. Do you want to start off with the poll first, Gloria? And then
we can do the poll. I'll put it up.
Great.
Okay, hold on now. Give me a second.
All right.
Let's see, poll 2.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So everybody, this is our second poll of the day. And the question is, which of the following would be biodegradable, either in a landfill or compost? I'll give everybody some time to make their decisions. And then our second question is, what do you think about the following statement? The equivalent of one garbage truck of plastic is dumped into the sea every minute. That's 17.6 billion pounds every year. All right, so give everybody some time to make a decision, either Google on your phone real quick. And then once we have our results, we'll go on to our next speaker.
Okay. I'm gonna end the poll now. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now. We got 22. I think that's good.
Okay.
And I'll share the results.
All right, so if you picked C, a corn cob, you were definitely correct. Even the smallest piece of plastics, they actually don't biodegrade even if they get weathered. They just keep on breaking down into microplastics. And Dr. Jenna Jambeck would go a lot more into that as well. And then, yes, it is sad but true, but just think of a garbage truck literally driving into the ocean. And that is what we are experiencing as far as the pollution of plastic that we have in our environment now. So it is with a great honor to introduce Dr. Jenna Jambeck, a distinguished professor from the University of Georgia and an environmental engineer. And I will let Dr. Jenna Jambeck be able to, show you her presentation for the day.
Thanks, Mac. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. This community is so engaged and already very knowledgeable on this, and it's actually amazing to follow Kara as well, because that was an incredible presentation. So anyway, I am going to pull up slides. I promise this won't be death by PowerPoint, but I have lots of pictures to share with you. So take you on a little journey. And I think in this case, we want to know, how are plastics ending up in our environment? What kind of impact are they having? And I can't just be doom and gloom with my presentation. So I do talk a little bit about, what we're all doing, which you all are engaged and doing a lot already. And then, what else we can do individually. Just really quickly, this conversation has reminded me even again why I have this slide. There's so many people around the world working on this issue. I've had the pleasure and honor of meeting many of them. And oftentimes the people dealing with our waste remain the most unrecognized, under-resourced. So just even the conversation about the Department of Sanitation having its budget cut, we all want our environment clean and our waste to, sort of magically go away. There is no way. But oftentimes, again, as I said, sort of underfunded, under-recognized situation. So I just like to take a moment, acknowledge people I've worked with, people I've met around the world, and everybody working to manage our waste and keep plastic out of our environment. I am going to give you some numbers, and I think this will be you got the New York picture with CARE, which was, I think, really important, but trying to sort of understand what's happening around the world. And I think Barbara did a great introduction, thinking about how much plastic you've used. Oftentimes I do this in my course. How much plastic have you even just touched in 24 hours? I have students measure that. And so in many ways, we can't imagine our life without it, but it wasn't that long ago that there was only 2 million metric tons of plastic produced in a year, 1950. And yet now we have a cumulative 8.3 billion metric tons that's been produced. An impossible number to imagine. And even if we, convert that into 80 million blue whales, we can't imagine it. And so, because a lot of it is this material that we're using quickly and putting into the waste stream, 40% about is for packaging. That meant that by 2015, 6.3 billion metric tons had become waste. And now all of the reasons that we're using this material, it's so useful, right? It's, as we said, in our electronics, in medicine, in a lot of this packaging. And Kara did a great job of talking about, what can be done with that material. You can extract colors, right? Because it can be any color of the rainbow. It can be rigid, soft, the film material. So that's actually what makes it challenging to recycle. But, SIMS is doing an incredible job. But that variety, which is its usefulness. So globally, as of 2015, we had only recycled 9% of that. So we can ramp that up even more. And of course, that varies individually. About 12% had been incinerated, and then 79% was either ending up in landfills or open environment. And so that leads to the research, that number that you heard, that dump truck of plastic or garbage truck of plastic entering the ocean every minute was research that we conducted and published in 2015. And that was looking at the quantity of plastic waste produced around the world, and then that was mismanaged near a coastline and then estimated to end up in the ocean. And so that's 8 million metric tons, or that 17 billion pounds that you heard as well. And so how does, if we mismanage the plastic on land, if it ends up in our environment, how does it get into our waterways? Well, it can be washed or blown directly into the ocean. It can also be washed or blown into our rivers, which we now know are sort of these conduits, but they're not direct pipelines. A lot of plastic gets hung up within the river systems themselves, estuary environments, and again, on land. I mean, I visited places in the Middle East, deserts. There's plastic there, and animals, our terrestrial animals are also interacting with them there. Our camels, are the cows in India. Those situations exist as well. We know that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about microplastic, but I'll quickly touch on, fibers that are in our environment are often airborne. We now know that when the waves break onto the shore, there's plastic in the air around that. It gets aerosolized. So we've got this atmospheric transport of plastic as well. They've done air sampling. We found plastic at the very top. Some colleagues of mine with National Geographic, in the very top of Mount Everest, they sampled on an expedition and found microplastic, and then to the very depths of our ocean in the Mariana Trench. And so it's basically wherever we look, we're finding it. And really, for the most part, it's likely washing off and being put in from the land. But we also do have some marine and inputs from fishing activities as well. And so then, in that environment, sort of what's happening, and it's a dynamic system for sure. So you can have plastic enter the ocean, break down into smaller particles, and then be deposited back onto beaches. One really significant experience I had was before I crossed the ocean in this very small sailboat to look at plastic pollution. We were standing on an island before we left, and I was looking down at the waves washing up onto shore, and every wave just had a confetti full of plastic, just like you see here. And that was a deposition site, because you have these really large currents within the ocean and those gyres. And so actually the middle school video that we saw explained it very well. And so if you have land interrupting those, the plastic washes up onto shore there, it's deposited. So there may not be any people there even, but there will be plastic there. We know that plastic has been found in sea ice. If it's more dense than seawater, it will sink. Sometimes you also have microbial growth onto the plastic, which will change its density, and it will sink also to the bottom. That microbial growth, interestingly enough, actually makes sea life and oftentimes birds smell like food, or the plastic smells like food, and so they will consume more of it thinking that it's food. So we know that plastic is ending up in biota, so in the animals themselves. Some of it's sort of suspended in the water column, and then some of it gets buried in sediment. So there's all these different places that it can end up. And so this is an illustration put together by National Geographic in 2018, and it combines the research of our work on land inputs, as well as some of these riverine input data, and then the samples that have been taken in the open ocean. And looking at this, you realize the ocean is 70% of our planet. And so, there's been a lot of samples taken. But what we see floating on top is really only 3%, definitely less than 5% of what we estimate of going in every year. And so really trying to figure out, from that waste that we estimate to be, mismanaged on land, available in the environment, what's really happening to that material, and or what's really happening to the plastic once it ends up in the ocean. We haven't been able to quantify all those reservoirs. So here's a couple pictures of, actually trying to look at this plastic floating in the ocean, and you don't really see it as you're there. Well, you don't see it. I mean, the ocean looks pristine, to be honest, but you pull this net through and you pull that up, and then you see the microplastic within that net, which is quite impactful. Being an environmental engineer, I mostly worked on land, so doing this water work, specifically out in the middle of the ocean in this small sailboat, was really impactful to me as well, and maybe can touch on that more later. But this is what we mean by fragmentation. This was not taken from the middle of the ocean, just to be clear. This was what I saw washing up in that wave. So we collected this. So this was being basically spit back out of the ocean, and that's where I was really impacted. I'm like, yeah, the ocean does not want this material either, of course, right? So these are actually the pre-production pellets. You saw a couple of pictures of those. Unfortunately, as that's transported and or put into different containers, some of those can leak out. So this is actually what we melted down to make plastic items. Cigarette butts, that was sort of in the pool. That was, the filters of those are cellulose acetate, so those won't biodegrade, even though there's other parts that are paper. I think Barbara also did a great service when she's saying I use paper plates, but those are lined with plastic. So many things that look like paper actually have plastic within them and would not, biodegrade in the environment. Here's a part of a straw. Again, it's just going to fragment over time, get fouled with this microbial growth. Both animals are just both curious, as well as they might think it's food. And so it basically, when animals eat the plastic, it will fill their belly. Potentially some of it will also pass through, so it could agitate the digestive system, it could scrape it, but also it can fill the belly if they can't pass it and they can't expel it, and then they will basically starve to death. So these are really well-known photos that have been taken at Midway Island of the albatross who have consumed plastic. And then entanglement. So basically ingestion and entanglement are some of the two most well-documented ways that marine life and, honestly, as I said, terrestrial animals interact and are impacted by plastic. This is sort of that video that went very viral of this turtle that had a straw stuck in its nose. And then we also now know that, you know, even the smallest animals within our food web, right, the zooplankton, they are consuming, or they have the ability to consume plastic that is small enough. And so I'm not going to touch on the humans because I know that's coming up next, but, you know, we are in this same food web of these animals and also have, you know, exposure in terms of our environment as well. And so, you know, it's coming back around. So that's sort of we're defining the problem, but I do want to provide sort of a framework of, you know, how can we turn the tide on this issue? How can we address this? And this is something that when I was asked to talk to Congress, I thought about our research and sort of like, well, if we're creating this much waste and then some of it ends up in the environment, you know, what can we do in a stepwise fashion? How can we have a framework to address this issue? And it might be different everywhere else, but if we want zero input into the ocean, you know, what can we do? Well, first of all, we can reduce how much we're using. And that could be either consumer driven or voluntary or regulated. And then we can look at different materials and product design. We want to reduce the waste that we're generating in the first place, of course, and then improve our waste management systems to be able to capture those materials. And then we sort of have this chance for last chance capture before it gets into the ocean, because some people ask about, well, can we just clean up the ocean? But as you saw, I think from that map, how big the ocean is makes that very challenging, expensive, all kinds of reasons that's hard. But if we do collect material from our environment using that data, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, to inform what we do upstream to make changes so that we can, you know, sort of circle back and eventually get to zero input. So I just want to talk a little bit about these steps, just a few examples quickly, but, you know, thinking about, you know, avoiding that single-use item. But I also want to just stress that not everyone has the luxury of doing that. I think when Barbara referred to World Water Day and the people who still have lack of access to clean water, many times packaged water is the only thing that you can get. But there's now ways to get filtered and or use your reusable water sort of container on the go. So thinking about how we can use technology and many reuse systems that trying to meet our expectations of convenience that we have in our everyday lives right now that are satisfied many times by single-use items. Can we make reusable items as convenient? And then how about if we do have to use single use, can we design those so that they are recyclable? And so sometimes talking about limiting how you design those and what materials and additives are used. Many plastics contain additives, and if there's a certain additive, then that makes it harder to recycle. Looking at new materials, this is my colleague who runs the New Materials Institute here at the University of Georgia. Many folks are really trying to get to those stage, and then improving our recycling and waste management systems, and then collecting that data. So we've been working with communities. You all, like I said, I feel like are already talking about this issue and really trying to do a lot. When I'm talking to communities, sometimes they're like, well, what should we do? And so working with them to collect data in their community, having another, this circularity assessment protocol that we work with them on. It's not just about like what's ending up on the ground, which is a leakage component, but if you think about what we all use every day, that is a part of the system that we live in, right? What do we have at the store to purchase? You know, I think Kara alluded to when she said, if you're going to go plastic free, it's really challenging because there's really not many places to be able to buy and get material, you know, get things. You end up making a lot of things yourself. And I mean, so many of us don't have time. And so it can be challenging. So we're trying to work with communities on that. And we really believe that this data is, well, it's co-owned by communities or owned by them. But we also believe in open data with our tools that we use for data collection. So I wanted to bring up this mobile app. It's now 11 years old. It's the same age as my youngest son. The same year we put this out, he was born, and it's called Marine Debris Tracker Full, but Debris Tracker for short. And we use this in all of our research, but also just people all around the world use this app to report litter that they find in the environment. It doesn't have to be in the water or even near the water. We use it many times in urban areas. And over 5.5 million items have been logged with this app, and we have sort of a long-term sponsorship so we can offer this free to everyone everywhere, and all the data is open because of working with Morgan Stanley and National Geographic. So this is the website. It's just debristracker.org. I'll drop it in the chat when I'm done. But the data is 100% free and open, as is the app, for everyone to use. And there's even specific organizations that have customized lists, because you can imagine what we find along the Ganges River in India and Bangladesh is different than what we find along the Mississippi River. And I'll actually refer to that in a minute. So we did use this app. And in 2019, I was really honored to lead this expedition for National Geographic with Heather Coldaway. So we co-led this. And we were in the Ganges River Basin for about 4 months that year, working with local partners who really led us in India and Bangladesh. And so just being able to engage folks in these sort of watershed, physical watersheds, that it was so important to how plastic is transported. So I just wanted to talk about how we use the app there. But then I wanted to bring us back home to the U.S. It's the middle of our country. The Mississippi drains 40% of the continental U.S., so a really significant portion of the land. And the mayors along the Mississippi River, 101 mayors, have committed to reducing plastic in the river 20% by 2020. So they made a lot of commitments, but they didn't really have a baseline measurement. So they started working with the UN Environment Program, North America Office, and us, and National Geographic to be able to come up with this baseline. But again, not a big budget. So what we wanted to do, or what they asked us to do, is to engage community members along the whole river. So this is just some example of the marine debris tracker data. So we designed a whole system for people to collect data in transects all along the river. Lots of community members came out. This is not to say that this should be the burden of community members to do. And so part of this was actually to collect data to figure out how to engage other stakeholders like the industry in this process. And I can tell you that, that's all happening. So this was 3 weeks last year. My usual team, as you saw, was that expedition team. Those were all scientists, many early career scientists, which was incredible. Well, during COVID, my expedition team was my family, and we lived in this little trailer for 3 weeks, traveling along the Mississippi, helping to collect data with all these communities. We had 3 pilot cities, Baton Rouge, St. Louis, and St. Paul, Minnesota, that were really, really engaged. So we ended up surveying the community members, 111 kilometers squared. Who knows how much that is? So we converted it. 20,000 football fields were scientifically surveyed. So much data for them. And then that's over 75,000 items were counted and logged. And then they removed about a grizzly bear of plastic within that component. And even more than that, because cleanups were conducted as well. But this was just what was scientifically surveyed and then removed. So yeah, I was asked to talk about what ends up in our environment. Well, cigarette butts have often been this top item, but I have to say food wrappers. So for example, the International Coastal Cleanup that the Ocean Conservancy does, food wrappers have overtaken cigarette butts at least one of the years now. And I have to tell you, in different communities, they switch. And so anyway, but cigarette butts for the whole entire basin were #1, followed by food wrappers. And I think what is very different about, for example, what I find or what we have found in the US and along the Mississippi as compared with the Ganges River Basin is that things that are recyclable and valuable in, in that recycle stream are still ending up in our environment, like plastic beverage bottles and aluminum cans. That really doesn't happen in other countries like India and Bangladesh, because they have this informal waste sector. And if anything is of value, it is collected and recycled. So, and that sector is problematic for reasons in that those folks are not sort of recognized and they don't have good working conditions, but that recycling is happening. And so we're doing a different kind of work there, trying to improve their system. But also fragments. So again, it's fragmenting right away in the environment. We see plastic bags, they blow out of systems. Foam or plastic cups, a lot of people are getting, sodas from gas stations in foam or plastic cups, and when we see those, oftentimes along with their straws. Also, some paper still ends up. So it's about 80%, 75 to 85% of what we find in terms of count is plastic in the environment. What did we see floating in the river? So we had folks stand and count items as they floated by in the river. And so you can kind of see, thinking about the transport, it was actually foam fragments, those float, plastic bags that are easily sort of blown or washed into the river itself. And then the bottles, even though PET, so this what the bottle is made of would be more dense once it's filled with water, but since it's floating and filled with air, it floats on top. And same thing with aluminum cans. And then we've got the foam and plastic cups. So a lot of those light items end up in the river itself. And then we collected brand information. So this was a big part of this in trying to figure out who do we engage and have conversations with. And that sort of relates to a concept called extended producer responsibility, which I can maybe elaborate more on in some of the questions. But really thinking about if companies are, selling and making money from products that are packaged in material that is ending up in our environment, can we engage them? Can we figure out how to have conversations about, can we either get these products to people without this kind of packaging or change, there's all kinds of conversations to be had, or just get resources to improve our waste management system so we can capture it. So there was a lot of different brands, and then we collapsed those eventually into parent companies to have conversations with, especially the mayors, right, to talk to. So this is my last slide. I just want to say, whether you are a mayor or anyone, any leader in government, you're so excited to see the borough president and assembly member here. Or you're just a preschooler, everyone can really, make a difference on this issue. And I know, I have friends who just go all the time and pick up this material, and it really shouldn't be our burden, but it is. And I even do it in my area. I just, when I'm driving my son to school and I see litter, I have to go back later and get it, because it's hard for me to see it and just see it there. So I know that we can change this whole system and prevent this from getting into the environment in the first place, which is what we all want to see. So thank you so much for listening, and look forward to some more discussion. And thank you to everyone here who continues to be so engaged on this issue.
Dr. Jambeck, thank you. That was amazing. And I really think it's just important how you're able to break down, really a macro problem, and you really study the micro about it, because I really think it's those little things, even seeing it down to the brand, even seeing it down to what item it is what really is going to make people think, those questions of, what is this material? Where did it come from? Where's it going? How's it discarded? And I think those questions really start to make you consider what you're consuming and what you're discarding and how you're discarding it. And then ultimately that, influences our behaviors. People will think a little bit longer. I'm not going to put this poison in the ocean, or I'm not going to put this litter on the street that's going to end in the ocean. Then I'm going to end up eating it, and it's going to make me sick or harm wildlife. So really, thank you. I know that will have big influence. Just as a follow-up question, in my role, I work with the City Councilwoman, Savina Brooks Powers, Majority Whip, and as a sanitation liaison, environmental liaison. And the Councilwoman has supported bills that help to reduce plastic waste within New York City. Like our intro to 1775 is Skip the Stuff bill, where it stops restaurants from putting in plastic waste that a lot of people don't really use, the cutlery. And then also bills like the plastic straw ban. I saw the turtle there. I own 2 turtles myself. That really hurt to see. So those things that I know the Councilwoman is doing, and other legislation that other policymakers can influence, what would you say is some policy that we can look out for, some legislation that we can look out to that does the same thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, yeah, you're exactly right about the information, collection. So having the exact item data, I think it feels sometimes onerous, especially when you just want to get the stuff cleaned up and get it out of the environment. But collecting that data, it does actually lead to, well, how did this get here? We have this questions like, what is it? How did it get here? And then what can we do about it? And that sort of completes, the whole picture. And that leads to potentially the policies that you're now talking about, depending upon what you're finding, might lead you to that. So I do think, that Skip the Stuff sounds great, because I think oftentimes, straws are just given. So that was also just even going to straws by request instead of automatically giving straws. It could be a big step, right? It's going to reduce that number, because, what we see ending up in the environment, polluting our environment, is definitely a result of what we're using. And I'm going to give one more example before I talk again about legislation. But when the pandemic started, right? So with Marine Debris Tracker, this is called sort of participatory sensing. People are telling us what they're finding. That it's like sensors around the world. And within about 2 weeks of when sort of the mandates of wearing PPE, like masks and gloves and wipes, we now see in about 2 weeks, we started to see it in Debris Tracker. And then now it's a consistent 1 to 2% of the litter that we find. So our transects are 100 meters long. That means in a 100-meter transect, we find either a glove or a wipe or a mask, like at least 1 to 2 of those items. And so backing up to if we can, reduce use, and those things were needed, right? So this is not a judgment on that. It's just like, that's a fact of what we use. Some of it ends up here. So especially when it's single use and on the go and those kinds of things. So what can we do? Let's, if there's what we call, the UN is looking at this now in terms of unnecessary, avoidable, and problematic plastics. And those might be different based upon where you are. As I mentioned, the water, we might say, well, plastic water bottles are not needed here. And, we could even, we could regulate those in some way, but there's somewhere else where they are, right? So it's very context specific, but definitely saying, we're not going to put extra plastic things in your to-go order unless you request it, or ask if you need those. That can reduce things right away. Of course, if there is something that's unnecessary, I think, the bans are there. You can do a tax system, because if you want to raise funds to address this issue as well, you'll cut back on use, as well as potentially have funds to put towards this. But the extended producer responsibility, I think this is one that I hadn't heard discussed as much here, but like in Maine, there was some legislation that was passed, and a lot of states are really looking at this. It's like, how can we get resources from the industries that are creating this packaging? And it's not that dissimilar to like a private facility. I mean, I have a tank farm that's down the road from me. They had to help improve our roads before they put in this above ground storage tank farm, right? So like, it's not foreign to us to have, you know, private industry contribute to our infrastructure to be able to manage, you know, their contribution to that. So I think that is the discussion that I would say. Otherwise, you all are doing many policies that have been discussed and not implemented in places. You all are really working to implement them. You have bills going through. So I would maybe just add EPR to that as well.
Yes, and that has been a hot topic in New York City over these last couple of weeks as we watched the state handle that. So I'm gonna turn to the floor for some questions, and then after that, I'm gonna introduce the Majority Whip Leader, Councilwoman Brooks Powers. All right, so if I don't see any hands up, I'm gonna turn the floor over to our Councilwoman of the 35th District and the Majority Whip Leader, Sylvania Brooks Powers.
Hello, 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 everyone, and good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Matt. It's great to see everyone in the virtual space. I'm just scrolling through, see a lot of familiar names and faces, and a lot of new names and faces also, and it's a pleasure to pop in really quickly on this event. Just wanted to share that since being in office, which just made a year recently, we've been pretty aggressive in wanting to make sure we center the conversation as it pertains to environmental justice. The office takes it so seriously. We have folks like Mac Lawrence, who is on the team that has a specific focus in his portfolio on environmental and sustainability issues. Recognizing the need to really educate our community around this space and also create opportunities to come together as community and prioritize the issues that matter most to us to ensure that we have a safe, clean, and environmentally friendly community. I've been a part of sponsoring over a dozen litter cleanups. Our office has worked in tangent with our partners in government, including Assemblymember Anderson and Senator Sanders, as well as DJ Net, who uses her own time, does not get paid to do this, and do cleanups across Southeast Queens. We've been able to bring the DEP commissioner out as well. And we're in the plans of creating more sustainable solutions to address some of the local flooding we see, especially since being appointed as chair of transportation and infrastructure. We know how important the conversation of infrastructure is in our community. And so we're looking to leverage that role to be able to address some of the chronic and historic issues that we've had around the flooding in the community. We've also been very engaged in terms of the conversation around sanitation. I myself have testified on past hearings about enforcing the cleaner streets and the waste equity within the district. We get a lot of calls in our office about illegal dumping, litter removal on a daily basis. I think Mac talks to sanitation and our other partners, such as ACE and Wildcats, every single day, probably. When I got elected, I went in thinking certain issues would be top priorities based on, issues that are important. But what I found is in our day-to-day sanitation, the cleanliness of our office, the flooding dynamic, the dumping dynamic into our marshlands, into our ocean, into the bay, are issues that we hear actually the most. And, we will continue to push the issue. And that's my little daughter that is ready for me. But I thank everyone for the opportunity to be a part of today's program and continue to advocate around this issue in Southeast Queens.
Mac, unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Majority Whip Brooks Powers. And thank you for coming in and informing us about, some more things that we can do in our district and around Southeast Queens. Now I'm going to switch it and introduce two marine biologists. It was very important to have them as guest speakers. As Queensborough President briefly touched on about, there not being always a lot of representation in some of these spaces that we normally may not see Black and brown folk, but we've been there from the beginning of time in these spaces. So I would like to introduce marine biologist, marine educator, Tanisha Swift. And then right after her is going to follow is Simone Barkley of Black and Marine Science. And they're going to be able to talk to us about, their environmental education and all of the initiatives that they do.
Thank you so much, Mac, for having me today. I promised to keep it short, so I'm just going to share my screen just to add some visuals to my presentation. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go. So as mentioned, my name is Tanisha Swift, Brooklyn native, so born and raised in New York City, specifically Bed-Stuy, but I have family all over. And so my primary role is a marine educator, but I wear many hats, from a scuba diver, oyster restoration practitioner with the Bay and Oyster Project, which I'll talk about really shortly, open water swimmer. And so my life has been literally, involving water since a very young age. And my primary role, in the New York City realm, is working with the Bay and Oyster Project. So Bay and Oyster Project is a nonprofit aimed at restoring oysters to New York City through public education initiatives. And so New York City's history has a very extensive, long stories about how our waterways got to be in the condition that it is and what we're doing to improve it. And a part of what we're trying to do is restore that habitat, get students to the waterfront, get New Yorkers to the waterfront. And specifically for me, my personal goal is seeing, people of color, people from the community, people from inner cities involved in their waterfront in a way that they can continue to advocate for it. So I've put my information, my name, Bay and Oyster Project website and our Instagram pages below, just in case anyone wants to sort of look in and learn more about what we do, but just so that everyone knows some of the ways that you can get involved. So as mentioned, we work with these oyster reefs all around New York City. We also have one that's in Queens, so our Far Rockaway, what's called Field Station. And the idea is that community members and students can, attend one of these free events. You're getting to not only learn about oysters, you're getting your hands and feet wet, because people tend to forget that New York City is a very coastal city. We're surrounded by water, 520 miles of coastline. And a part of the reason why we're restoring those oysters is not for the ecosystem, not only for the ecosystem benefits, so filtering water, creating habitat for fish and critters, and then also shoreline protection, but once again, engaging people into that work. I love stories. I'm a huge storyteller. And so sharing these experiences with students and getting them out into the waterfront is a large, emphasis in the way that we can change policy, create the new generation of environmental leaders and educators. And I know I said I'm only going to do one slide, but I just had to show this last video. It's actually in Jamaica Bay at our field station site, close to Far Rockaway. And of course, it gives it away. I don't think I put my volume on. But essentially, there's lots of life living in our harbor, including seahorses. So there you have it. This was one of the days we were scuba diving in Jamaica Bay. So right in Queens, right in New York City. And unfortunately, during this same dive, we found some trash, which we ended up picking up. I'll pause it there and stop sharing my screen. But just goes to show that, there's lots of things happening in our harbors, lots of ways that you can get involved. If you are a student or, you're hoping to get, folks onto the waterway, feel free to reach out to me and we can plan something, at any coastline around New York City. So I'll stop there. I know time is kind of the essence. And thank you again for having me, and hopefully we'll see more folks out into the field.
That was amazing. So excited to see too. And introducing Simone Barkley from Black and Marine Science.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So gonna share mine really fast. So hi everybody. Almost good afternoon. I'm Simone Barkley. I'm a marine biologist and an environmental educator. I specialize in sharks, and then I really spent a lot of time working on policy and moved more into education. I'm based out of Baltimore City, not in New York, but Baltimore City has a lot of the similar environmental justice issues. And so I think that a lot of the conversations that you all have had earlier today really resonate with the work that I do here and then the work of Black Marine Science. So very quickly, Black and Marine Science is an organization, a nonprofit that my friends and I actually started in 2020. And our goal is to highlight and amplify Black voices in the field of marine science, ocean science, and encourage younger generations while also shedding light on the lack of diversity in marine science. So there's a QR code here on the screen that you can see, but if you want to scan that QR code, it'll allow you to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we have tons of content there. But Black and Marine Science really aims to, we're a really small but mighty organization that has members across this country and various other continents. We created the first Black and Marine Science Week in December of 2020. And since then, we've been able to expand into a nonprofit. We offer paid opportunities for the members of our organization. And so they're paid to create these BIMS Bites, which is what you see mentioned here on the YouTube channel, BIMS Bites and BIMS Bites Kids, which are small bites of marine science topics in research that marine scientists are conducting. So these conversations include topics like marine debris and alternative reef habitats, coral reefs, sharks, contaminants from metals or plastics and how they impact fish, jellyfish, and so much more. Our YouTube channel has other content as well called BIMS Dives, where we highlight issues that particularly face Black communities and brown communities and low-income communities, like air pollution, like improper disposal of waste or water contamination, access to green space, all of these issues that we know we are really dealing with. And then we also share scholarship, job opportunities, internship opportunities, paid field experiences. So we do lots of things that we can do to try to engage the community, even if you are marine scientists or have an interest or want to learn more about the field. So that's our work, and I'm going to stop sharing really fast. But you are, yes. BIMS is we have a really large. We try at least to have a large social media presence. So I'm also going to just pop in the chat. This is our Padlet where we list all of the different opportunities that folks share with us. So this is internships, K through 12 opportunities for students, jobs, all sorts of things. So that'll just give you a little bit of an idea. And you can visit bims.org if you want to find out more about our work and or become a member. So thank you so much for having us.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Simone. And thank you so much, Tanasia. Everybody, please, go and look at those links that were provided in the chat. Thank you, Michael, for dropping them in there. And because I think really, for our youth and even for everybody, but I think it's just inspiring to know that there are like other opportunities or other interests that people can be a part of to really expand their horizons and also, better our environment at the same time. I think it's a win-win. So I encourage everybody to, wherever you are on your sustainable journey, keep at it. There's resources here, there's information out there, and we have community in these spaces. So I just want to thank you. That is my part for this evening. I'm gonna pass it over to the Honorable Barbara Brown.
Okay, so we've had a lot of focus on your role in making sure we keep plastics out of our waters, and that you know how to recycle and so forth. So the next piece, and I'm not sure if Dr. Trasande is here, but we wanted to.
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm going to give you a
Great.
little intro and we will move forward. Dr. Leonardo Trasande is an internationally renowned leader in children's environmental health and a friend of Eastern Queens Alliance, because every time we reach out to him, he comes and he presents his words of wisdom to us. And he's been spending a lot of devoting his research to the role of environmental exposures in children and how that impacts their health, particularly in terms of cardiovascular risk and obesity, et cetera. And he will talk to you about those things. But also what we know is by extrapolation, children grow into adults. And so those environmental exposures don't just end with childhood. So at this time, we are very pleased to introduce Dr. Trasande to talk about the human impacts of all that we've been talking about this morning. So Dr. Trasande, welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Sorry that my bandwidth isn't good enough for video, but we'll go ahead and hopefully I'll be able to still provide a robust contribution to this great panel. Some of you may have the memory of the movie The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman is spoken to as a young college graduate about the great things that plastics bring to society and it being the future, if you will. I've never had the chance of asking Mr. Hoffman how he feels about having been part of that movie today. My hunch is that he would have a bit of regret because unfortunately what we've learned the hard way is that there are a host of consequences for chemicals in a broad array of consumer products and their impacts on the hormones in our bodies. And as Barbara wonderfully described, the majority of that research, the early part of that research was about children because we focus on children because of their unique vulnerability, their greater exposure per pound of body weight, their developing organ systems and their impacts. But increasingly we realize that life is a window of susceptibility to chemicals commonly found in the environment and most especially and unfortunately in plastics. Before I go into the science that shows those effects, I want to emphasize that we know much more about the chemicals that absorb directly into the human body than we do about microplastics. Everyone probably has heard in the media some recent issue relating to plastics that they see in feces, in the water, in fish. Most recently, I was asked to comment about an article that found these microplastics in human blood very recently. I would have to tell you that the science of what we know about the direct effects of those microplastics is much weaker. But what I will say is that when you see microplastics in blood, when you see microplastics in urine, that's the tip of a bigger iceberg, if you will. There is arguably a much larger and more diverse array of synthetic chemicals that are directly absorbed into our bodies when you see microplastics. Microplastics is just the visible edge or barely visible edge of a broader and bigger human health threat. So I have no disagreement that there are huge ecological consequences of microplastics and macroplastics for wildlife. It's just that what we know, and the science in particular, is much stronger about these invisible chemicals that are directly absorbed into the human body and have consequences for the entire lifespan. So there are three categories of chemicals that I'm going to focus on today. It doesn't represent the entire universe of chemicals of concern of plastic. Part of that is that we're just still catching up to even knowing what's in plastic materials. There are lots of exemptions through the Food and Drug Administration at the federal level for companies to use chemicals unintentionally and intentionally in food contact materials, and they don't have to even tell you what's in them as long as they say or vouch that it's somehow safe. And that means we are playing constant catch up, trying to prove the harm, if you will. So I'm going to focus on three categories of chemicals. Bisphenols used in harder so-called polycarbonate plastics. They're also used in thermal paper receipts. Then we're also going to talk about phthalates, a hard thing to spell. PHTH is the first four letters of it. But these are chemicals used, apologies for my background noise. Phthalates are used in softer plastics to make them more flexible, typically polyvinyl chloride plastics. And then there are perfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. These are more known as non-stick chemicals in cooking and oil and water resistant clothing, but increasingly we understand that there are fluoropolymers. These forever chemicals are made into polymers to make plastics as well. So those are the three categories of chemicals. You may have heard about PFAS in the news too, because PFAS was profiled in a movie called Dark Waters, done by Mark Ruffalo, about a large contamination episode in West Virginia with this suite of chemicals. So what do we know about these chemicals and what they do to human health? Well, first of all, I've already alluded to it, but hormones are natural signaling molecules. They underlie everything from maintaining healthy body temperature, good metabolism, salt, sugar, even sex. And just to use bisphenols as an example, bisphenols are synthetic estrogens. And so when you have a synthetic estrogen running around in the human body, you can have effects in men and women and boys and girls that vary by the sex and the other natural hormonal levels in the body. So these chemicals we're talking about were not designed with the human body in mind. They didn't actually have to be formally tested the way you would think drugs are, and they generally are not still tested to this day as well as drugs are for their safety before they're used into market. But what we know about bisphenols in particular is not just that they're synthetic estrogens and can have effects on ovarian function and development. We know that they are chemical obesogens, chemicals that literally make us fatter. So bisphenols have effects on the programming of our metabolic system. They program the stem cells, the cells that we carry around that can become anything in the human body. They program these stem cells to shift from bone, which is good for growth, it's good for maintaining strength and structure in later life as well, into fat. And they also antagonize a protein that protects the heart called adiponectin. And what we know in human studies is there are effects in kids as well as adults on metabolism, contributing to obesity as well as diabetes, particularly in adults, and heart disease, unfortunately. We did a series of studies just a couple of years ago looking at levels of BPA in the urines of adults and then tracked over time whether, this is going to sound crude to talk about, whether they died or not. And we found that the higher the BPA level 10 years earlier, the more likely they were able to die. Well, they died, unfortunately, from heart disease. So we often talk about these chemicals as having effects on child development, and that's important, but they're having life or death consequences in some cases for human health. The softer plastic chemicals, the phthalates, also contribute to inflammation in the body. They antagonize, in some cases, the male sex hormone, testosterone. And they can cause, by virtue of that inflammation and antagonism to the male sex hormone, testosterone, they also can contribute to heart disease. So in a series of studies we've done over the past few years, we've seen that phthalate levels are associated with increases rather in mortality from heart disease, again, not to mention increases in gestational diabetes in mothers, which has consequences for development in the womb, as well as increases in childhood obesity and even changes in pubertal development. So the consequences, unfortunately, are broad, and some people will say, well, they're too broad to be even possible, but when you mess with hormones, you mess with a lot of different things. And that the things you mess with vary, and the outcomes that you induce vary by the time of exposure and the point in human development. And really the entire lifespan is a period of development of various sorts. So the non-stick chemicals are of especially great concern, not only because they contribute to growth retardation in babies, making them smaller and more likely to have low birth weight, but because of a hypothesis we know as the Barker hypothesis, that in utero growth restriction has consequences that not only start in childhood with obesity, but also have consequences for even cardiovascular disease and diabetes. We know from this hypothesis that when a baby goes through growth restriction, be it from an environmental insult or a nutritional insult, the body is then programmed in a thrifty phenotype where the body maladapts to the environment after birth and avidly holds on to calories as though they are crucial and need to be stored rather as fat, rather than used into muscle or other more functional body components. And so the consequences for that kind of exposure can be really permanent and lifelong. Now, I've thoroughly probably depressed you for the past 10 minutes. I've been listening to some wonderful, hopeful presentations about things you can do in the local environment. I don't mean to leave you with that as the only story here, because there are safe and simple steps we can all take to reduce our exposures to these chemicals of concern. And the great news is that you don't need a PhD in chemistry, and this doesn't have to break the proverbial bank. You know, the reality here, for example, is that studies have reduced bisphenol and phthalate levels in high income as low income, and as well as low income populations. And these chemicals often are what we call short half-life chemicals. So if you do something now, you can see changes in levels in the human body in days. You can see hormonal level changes in weeks. And then you can see chronic disease benefits in terms of prevention that can last for months and years to come if you stay with the safe and simple steps. So let's just run through them very quickly. So we have gotten a bit too used to the convenience of plastic. Let's be honest. We have a warped relationship, pardon the pun, with plastic in human life. You know, take for example, sure, if I'm on an airplane for 14 hours and I'm going from point A to point B, I'm not doing that much these days, but bear with me with the example. We've gotten used to the fact that carrying a water bottle is a must-have. But the reality is you can bring a stainless steel container across security even, and bring that stainless steel container empty across that security piece, and then fill up the water bottle and carry it onto the plane and drink like nothing is different. And you know, when you're in the office or at home, in particular, glass and stainless steel are perfectly good alternatives to plastic containers. And you know, another thing that folks can do is to avoid canned food consumption. Unfortunately, there's a lot of new bisphenols that replace BPA, which is the most notorious bisphenol. And the BPA-free cans are not necessarily bisphenol-free, unfortunately. Not to mention they may also have other chemicals of concern if they've used different materials to make those can linings. And we know that canned food consumption can vastly increase bisphenol levels. So there are a lot of alternatives out there, locally produced fruits and vegetables, frozen fruits and vegetables. Yes, sometimes they come in plastic bags, but plastic bags, the frozen variety, are less problematic than canned foods in particular. It's important also not to microwave those plastic bags, or frankly any plastic, because those chemicals that are in the plastic lining aren't necessarily covalently bound. They can also break down the polymers, the heat can, and those polymers turn into monomers and ultimately get absorbed into the human body. And for those non-stick chemicals, the PFAS I talked about, avoiding non-stick cooking materials is important. Using stainless steel or cast iron is a good way to go. Another safe and simple step is simply opening the window and recirculating the air, because there are a lot of persistent organic pollutants that accumulate in the dust due to electronics and furniture that have these same chemicals. So a lot of people wonder how I can have hope. And my hope comes from a few different places. One is that the science tells us there are safe and simple steps to reduce exposure. I have particular hope in my young children and the broader portfolio of folks in the millennial generation and Generation Z, because they've really caught on to climate change, and endocrine disrupting chemicals and plastics really are both in many ways byproducts of fossil fuel production and consumption, because many of the chemicals used in plastics come from oil production and consumption. So we do need to address both sets of challenges. If we cool the planet and don't deal with contamination, we will not be able to enjoy the planet that we've otherwise have. But I do have a lot of hope, because I've seen so much progress, in particular through consumer activism, frankly. The power of the pocket and the pocketbook and wallet is quite profound. And we've seen explosions in market share for so many healthier materials. And many of the companies that are selling them don't even know they're using them in the first place. And it's often they that have the power to go to their upstream manufacturers and do the right thing. So I'll stop there. I don't know, Dr. Brown, if I'm over my time or if I've got a few minutes left, but I'm really privileged about the opportunity. Apologies for any background noise during the talk, and thank you.
And thank you so much, Dr. Trasande. And thank you for those safe, simple steps, because even like canned foods and sometimes, you know, we've talked about environmental justice, and very often canned foods are being pushed in poor and minority communities. And so that was very, I was glad to hear you emphasize that. I was wondering, just like Matt Clarence asked our last guest, is there any policy legislation that you have or would recommend through your work? Because we have some of our legislators online.
I don't want to cite specific examples because most of them that I can think of right now are really at the federal level. I appreciate, but I want to emphasize and applaud some of the state and local actions, particularly in New York. The states are, to borrow Hamilton's Federalist philosophy, are the laboratory for the federal government. And often state actions, particularly in New York, but in other states as well, Maine, California, elsewhere, Washington come to mind, have really put the chemical industry in an interesting bind, in that they can't really make 50 versions of the same particular formulation. So if a state acts to limit these exposures, it really can have consequences for the entire country, if not other parts of the world. So it's really an effect multiplier. And, you know, I just want to say something about the cost of these alternatives that is often bandied about. So the manufacturers will say, well, the chemical manufacturers will say, well, it's too costly. Well, just to use canned food, for example, one naturally derived alternative is 2.2 cents on the can. And we did a study, this is now rather dated, about 8 years ago, where we compared and did a hypothetical scenario. What if you got BPA out of canned food linings? And we found in some scenarios that the benefits were greater than the costs of replacing BPA with, let's say, oleoresin, which is one safer alternative that has been proposed. And that's simply just looking at two potential health benefits of reducing BPA exposure, childhood obesity and cardiovascular disease in adults. So that really speaks to the potential for great benefits to society at an economic level.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience?
I had a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Trasande, thank you for that presentation. So informative. You had me when you said microplastic is showing up in blood work and urine work, and couldn't help but wonder when I go to my doctor and it's time for blood work on a blood test, is that something that I can request that a testing can be done? Can that be captured so that I know if I have micro plastics sitting either in my urine or in my blood work? Is that doable for us as first?
That's a great question. Really thoughtful. And I don't advise it, and I'm going to explain why. And this is because the good news is that the safe and simple steps we're talking about can be done regardless of the level that you would have. And the testing, unfortunately, is still, I would say, either at the research level, so not really as available as it will be probably in 10 or 15 years, which I know sounds like a long time, but also it's costly in general. And so my advice is to take the safe and simple steps and not worry about the specific individual level. I mean, there are labs that do these tests, but they're typically $500 to $1,000, whereas the safe and simple steps I'm talking about are often free. So, or modest on the pocketbook in that comparable range.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there
My pleasure.
Yes. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Gloria. Thank you, Dr. Trasande. That was very, very, very helpful and interesting. I just, you know, from a practical perspective, like I buy frozen dinners all the time. They're packaged in a plastic container. Supposedly they're safe to put in the microwave to defrost and heat up my meal. Are you saying that that's not a good idea to do?
I hate to tell you this, my advice is not. Yeah, no, this is the other thing. No one should beat themselves up by hearing about this. I mean, I, you know, as a college student, I ate a lot of those same foods you're talking about. I didn't know about these issues well after medical school, frankly, because they don't teach this regularly in medical school, which is a problem. And that's got to be changed as well. But you know, the good news, as I said, is if you take the steps now to prevent exposure, you have short, medium, and long-term benefits for your health, regardless of what might have happened in the past. So I suggest looking forward, not backward.
Mm-hmm. So all this Tupperware, and I'm saving Chinese food, you know, containers and things and storing other stuff in it. Not a good idea. Yeah.
At the very least, take it out and don't microwave in the container itself. But frankly, I try not to buy them at all if I can.
Okay. This is very helpful and informative. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions? Hearing none, I really want to thank you, Dr. Trasande, for coming out and sharing all of this with us. And those safe, simple steps, I think we need to publish them out there, because I heard you say use stainless steel or glass as instead of plastic wherever possible. Avoid canned food. Preferably get your fruits and vegetables locally. Fresh fruits and vegetables. Frozen is better, certainly better than canned. And don't microwave any plastics. And I kind of outlined, I highlighted that there. And avoid the non-stick cooking products. So just one last question then, because I went out of my way to find a frying pan that would not have my eggs sticking to it when I finish. And you're saying, I'm hearing you say it's better to use the old-fashioned iron pan, frying pans.
Yes, or you can use stainless steel and put a little olive oil as your coating, if you will.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for coming out and spending time with us. Am I going back to you, Gloria, or?
Well, all I'll say is thank you to all of the committee members who worked so hard to put this presentation together. Thank you to our presenters and facilitators who did an excellent job today. And please, and thank you to our participants who have been with us all morning on a Saturday morning. And sometimes that's the only time we get to do things that we want to do for ourselves. Well, this is an important thing to do for yourself, isn't it? Get this information. But thank you to all. Please give us some feedback. I posted in the chat a link to a Google online survey. It takes all of 5 minutes to fill out. So please click on it and give us your feedback so that we can make sure that we understand what works for you and what, your preferences are, what your interests are, so that we can, respond to those in our upcoming sessions. And look
Gloria,
at our presentations. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
we have Ann Terry and Mimose Nelson. They both have their hands up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So in any case, and also we're going to stay on for a few minutes anyway, because people like to go and maybe copy certain links from the chat. Go in and look and explore the chat. There will be answers to some of your questions there. There will be links that you'll care about. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us, friend us, like us on Facebook and on Instagram, and we're now on Twitter, please, because we do try to reach out to people pretty regularly in those social media channels, and look out for upcoming activities. Mimose and Ann Terry, who was first?
I think I'm seeing Ann Terry up first. And
Ann
then
Terry?
Yes, I do. I have a question about silicone storage containers, which have been promoted as an alternative to plastic. And there are also silicone non-stick baking sheets. I wonder, are they safer than other plastics, or are they as problematic? In which case I'll have a lot of stuff to throw away.
Great question. The answer is it's safer. I'm not going to tell you something is perfectly safe or not. That's going to require a whole bunch of data that we don't actually necessarily have. But based upon the available data, silicone is safer.
Okay, thank you. That's a relief.
And Mimose Nelson?
You're on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. This is wonderful. A quick question, is microwaving okay? Is it okay to use a microwave?
Yeah, it's a valid question. I have no issue with microwaving. You should not necessarily stay right at the microwave. I mean, there is this notion of electromagnetic shielding that occurs at a very close distance, and but you know, the science of effects of that suggest not much in the way of concern beyond like being right near it. I mean, but microwaving doesn't do anything special to food that poses a problem except the heating that we talked about in the breakdown of plastic.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I guess just to close out, I want to also thank the entire committee who put this together, and including Gloria Boyce Charles, who chaired this effort, and I always say does the heavy lifting to make sure that everything is functioning well. And we have our people who are behind the scenes who are not necessarily on the committee, but also are people who make sure that we have a smooth running, that Michael Scotland and Darlene people. You have the program, a copy of the program, so that all of the names of all the different people who should be thanked are thanked in the program. So I know we're running over at this point. So I won't mention all of those names. In addition, I want to thank our sponsors and certainly our presenters, Karen Napolitano, Dr. Jenna Jambeck, and Dr. Leo Trasande. So thank you for all helping to make this a great morning. For your info, we will be posting this on YouTube, but we also we're streaming to YouTube. So if you want to go back and listen, you'll be able to do it either way through the stream or through our posting of the session. So thank you and good morning. And the next session is going to be in Waste Not Talking Trash Expo. It's slated for April 30th. So put that on your calendar and calendars, and you will be getting further information about that. That's going to be an in-person event, and we'll give you much more information about where and how. But it should be fun and educational and all of that. With that, I want to say thank you and see you next month. And Tanisha Swift, I will be reaching out to you because you're local, and Simone Barkley, I do also want to reach out to you for some further collaboration. Thank you.
And I put the names of all our committee
Right there,
members
everybody.
in the chat because I don't think it's in the program. That was my omission. Sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. No, that's on me. Sorry. Okay.